Hey friends, this is Andy. Chorus.ai is the platform for the Vice President of Sales. Chorus believes that customer conversations are a company's most powerful but most underutilized and overlooked asset. With every sales call and meeting seamlessly recorded, transcribed, and analyzed in real time, Chorus.ai provides an unparalleled view into your sales and customer success teams. Highlight coachable moments, uncover insights about your competitors, proactively identify at-risk deals, and so much more with Chorus.ai's elegant and easy-to-use solution for today's data-driven sales leaders. And even better, reps can get started for free today and start seeing real results within the first 5 minutes simply by going to hello.chorus.ai/signup. That's hello.chorus.ai/signup. Remember, Chorus.ai, today's platform for the VP of Sales. This episode of Accelerate is brought to you in part by Discover.org. Looking to close 4 times as many deals in half the time? Discover.org's industry-leading, human-verified sales intelligence gives you all of the data and insights like direct dials, org charts, planned projects, verified emails, and executive moves you need to stop wasting time on research and spend more time talking to the right decision-maker with the right message at the right time. Their team of 250-plus sales researchers do all the work so that you don't have to. 2,500 companies are already using Discover.org to win more deals. So check them out at www.discoverorg.com. That's www.discoverorg.com. It's time to accelerate. Hey friends, this is Andy. Welcome to episode 594 of Accelerate, the sales podcast of record. Join me today on Accelerate for the second time is my guest, George Brontén. George is the founder and CEO of Membrain, a sales effectiveness platform that drives winning sales behaviors. And in today's episodes, we're going to talk about the impact of cognitive biases on sales. Now, we all have certain sort of ingrained biases that have a direct influence on how we receive and communicate information with other people or, our buyers, for instance. And so in today's conversation, George and I are going to dig into the whole topic of the confirmation bias, which is the way that we selectively use data to reinforce our existing beliefs about something. We don't let data really challenge our worldview. And we all know sales is increasingly data-driven, but unfortunately too often our confirmation biases drive us to use this available data to reinforce our existing beliefs, our existing behaviors, rather than make necessary changes. And oftentimes, too, this confirmation bias, blinds us to our buyers' true motivations and actions, which can lead us to spend too much time on deals that we could never win, or miss opportunities to win deals that we should never have lost. So, join me with George as we talk about this really fascinating aspect of human behavior today. If you'd like to see the show notes for this episode, go to andypaul.com/594. Now, before I talk with George, let me remind you that today's show is brought to you in part by our friends at Discover.org. The Discover.org platform is a game changer for sales and marketing. The feature-rich sales intelligence platform is supported by 250-plus researchers who are continually updating the contact data and providing account-specific insights to help sales and marketing teams break ahead of the pack. You can see the product live at discoverorg.com/schedule-demo. Today's show is also brought to you in part by our friends at Chorus.ai. Chorus.ai makes your customer conversations work for you. VPs, sales enablement managers, account executives alike all benefit from the power and ease of Chorus.ai's platform. In fact, customers have seen dramatic increases in their close rates within the first 6 months, and ramp-up periods for new reps cut nearly in half, all the while gaining real insights to help you sell not only smarter, but better. So Chorus.ai, it's the platform to make the power of AI available for every sales team. So get started with that today. You can find it at Chorus.ai. All right, let's jump into it with George Brontén. George, welcome back to Accelerate.
Thank you very much, Andy. Happy to be here.
And you're joining us all the way from Sweden today?
Yep, I am.
Perfect.
Stockholm. Mm-hmm.
So, let's see, we're right about the Labor Day weekend. We're recording this. So you still have relatively late sunshine, I imagine, still?
Yes, we actually do. The
nice.
Weather is fine. Yeah, I can't complain.
No. Been there at that time of year. It's very, very beautiful. So, all All right. So here's standard question, different standard questions since last time you were on the show.
Okay.
That I ask guests at the beginning of the show, which is, in your mind, what's the single biggest challenge that's facing sales reps today?
To stand out and differentiate.
Okay.
It's my knee-jerk reply to that.
It sounds more considered than a knee-jerk reaction. So, yeah, how do they deal with that then?
I think they need to really understand their buyers and also their offering and what really makes them unique, and be able to communicate that very quickly. And that's not always easy.
No, it's not. But I mean, one of the difficult parts is oftentimes there is nothing really unique, right? I mean, it's so easy for products to become commoditized and to be perceived as being commodities by prospective buyers. Yeah, how do you stand out in that environment? In your mind, I mean, how do you stand out in that environment if you're a salesperson?
I think you have to have some nice speaking points, something that sort of gets the listener or the buyer to say, okay, I haven't heard that before. Even if your offering isn't unique, what you say can be unique.
Right.
So if you can say something that makes them sort of move a little in their chair, like, oh, what is he getting at? I think that's one way to get, as a conversation starter. And then all products are unique in one or another way, I think, once you get a little bit deeper into the offerings. But online, they all look the same.
Yeah, and so that early stage of the sales process, that's really where you have to be able to prove some sort of differentiation. Otherwise, why should they change from what they're doing?
Yeah, and of course, in the world we live in today, it's a lot about social proof as well. People will Google you, and they will see what other buyers have said about your company and your product. So I think that's crucial. But in the actual conversation, I think you need to have something that stands out to get the conversation started.
Yeah. All right. So we're gonna. That sort of relates a little what we're gonna talk about today. Is you wrote an article not that long ago that I read, and I don't say I picked up the phone and called you, but sent you an email and said, let's talk about this again. Is you wrote about the issue of confirmation bias in sales, and an interesting article, and so let's talk about that. So how are you defining the confirmation bias?
Yes, I think we have a lot of different biases. I think the researchers have defined hundreds of them, but really they're like shortcuts in our thinking, because we're so overloaded of information. We need to sort of delete some information and distort some other information, and the one we're talking about, the confirmation bias, I think it's really one of those shortcuts buyers are making and we are doing as salespeople that can be really detrimental to sales. So it's when you're looking for information to confirm that your existing belief is true. So you basically ignore everything else, even though other people can prove you're wrong. You still believe in what you have decided is the truth. I'm sure there are good definitions. I think the one I use is a system of thinking and decision-making shortcuts that is not based in logic. And it's an inclination to present or hold a partial perspective at the expense of a possibly equal or more valid alternative, was another definition I found online.
That sounds like one might be found online. Yeah. Well, I mean, I sort of always think about it as largely along the same lines, but maybe a slight twist to it is that, if you look at it from, let's say, a data perspective, right, that what you do is you pick and choose among the possible meanings of what the data you get in order to reinforce your own worldview, right, or your own perspective on something.
Like statisticians.
Yeah, and I think that to me always strikes me as sort of the best definition, right? Is you're picking and choosing the information that you're receiving in order to
Mhm.
confirm something that you already believe.
Yeah. And we all do it. I mean, that's the funny part, that when we look at these biases and we say, oh yeah, that my buyer does that. But you do it as well. So we all do it, but we also have a bias that we're not biased. So
Well, yeah. Well, it's an interesting point, because I think that's actually, I think a lot of what we sometimes think as confirmation biases are really just different biases, some that maybe are somewhat even unnamed, but I think it's one of the things that really, the thing that resonated about me with your article is this issue of just our biases in general in sales. And I've written about this, and I'm going to do more on it in an upcoming book and so on. But it's we have to acknowledge the fact that we have these biases. I think that's just the first thing that has to happen, whether it's a confirmation bias or more general biases. But as people who convey information and receive information, which is our job in sales, is we have to acknowledge that we carry biases that have a fundamental impact on how we communicate to someone else and how we receive information from them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and also at different levels. If you try to communicate with someone and they have a belief that's really about their own identity or their values, it becomes so difficult. I mean, you can't hardly have that discussion with someone. You're never going to sway someone to change religion, because they won't sway unless you have other arguments than facts, because there are no facts in religion. So maybe that was a poor example.
But I think, I mean, one example that maybe relates to that is the fact that having knowledge of someone's religion, especially if it's important to you, your own religion is important to you, that then creates a bias that, even at a subtle level, has an impact on how you interact with that person. I mean, there's a fascinating book that I read recently called Blind Spot, The Hidden Biases of Good People. And the authors are, I believe, two professors out of Harvard, Banaji and Greenwald. And the whole point of this book is about how our interactions are guided by these biases. And what they've done is they've created this test, and you can take this test online. It's called the implicit association test.
All right.
And they have a variety of them that are available. And it's a really simple test, and I've taken them several online. But what they do is it quickly surfaces sort of your preferences and biases that you may have for other people based on any number of categories and filters, if you will, ace, rage, gender, weight, ethnicity, and so on. And that all of those have some impact on, again, how we communicate and receive information from people. And they've had millions of samples of this test taken, and it's really very interesting, because as the authors talk about it in the book, is they're kind of disturbed when they took these tests themselves, because they found that even those of us who, and I credit myself, and I took the test as well, as seemingly very egalitarian, is that we all have some degree of sort of built-in and seemingly intractable biases toward people who are different than us. And I mean, some of it's just human nature, I think, but we have to be mindful of the fact that this influences how people perceive us, how we perceive other people, and how the communication between us, which is, again, the heart of selling, right? That's about communication, how that takes place. And if we're ignorant of it, then we're going to see this. We're going to see suffering. And if people want to take one of those tests, they can go to, I have the link here somewhere, implicit.harvard.edu.
I will definitely do that. That sounds exciting.
Yeah, and very eye-opening.
Yeah, and I think you're so right. We tend to believe things about ourselves that aren't always true. and once we can realize that, wow, we have these biases, and if I know how they affect me and affect my communications with others, I think that can be very, very powerful. And questioning, we talked. You asked me what was the most important trait for a salesperson, and I think that is questioning. But it's not just questioning like you have a script and you ask questions. It's about what questions do I ask at which time to this particular person. And I think language becomes so interesting because you can actually hear by the words the people use what motivates them.
Well, yeah. Well, and I think the questioning also goes to a deeper level, which is we also have to question ourselves, right? So why do I think this is true, right? The customer told me something. Why do I think that's true? Why do I take that at face value?
Mm-hmm.
And
what would be an example of that?
Well, I mean, I teach this to salespeople that I coach and mentor and managers as well. Is don't necessarily take what the customer says at face value, because there's some motivation behind it, right? They have their own biases at work, right? And their own motivations. We need to understand what those are. But if we just take at face value that what they say is exactly what they mean, then we're running a risk that we're really missing the point of the conversation. And people think that sounds like a very cynical way to go through life, but it's not. It's actually it's trying to be a little more perceptive and a little more open to what's really happening. Because
and it creates. I completely, sorry if I interrupted you, but I had a thought there I want to get out. It creates a lot more interesting discussions and dialogues, right? If you don't take what they say at face value. Like, we're so satisfied with the current supplier.
Right.
Okay. Or you say,
yeah, right. Most people say, oh, okay.
Oh, you are? Okay, that's too bad. Or it says like, oh, okay, how would you know when how would you know if somebody had something better? Or when do you know if your current supplier is not providing what could be the best solution for you? Mm-hmm. To get them thinking and get them talking, and like you say, that's when they will reveal the why behind the reply. Really, they just wanted to get you off the phone,
for instance, right? Yeah, I think that it's really important, and we'll delve more into that here as we continue the conversation. Is that we need to understand that our biases are driven by our emotions, and definitely. I mean some are somewhat almost innate, it sounds like, but it feels like but emotions, and to really sort of see the truth and hear the truth and put ourselves in position to hear the truth and what the customer's really saying is we need to recognize these feelings and understand that they're influencing how we think and how we behave.
Yeah, and I have a friend who always he reads everything about how our brain works, and one thing that he always brings up is that we make predictions of the future, and that's how the brain always thinks about things. Like, okay, we assume and we predict. So you have to be asking questions that question the predictions that they are making.
well, yeah. I mean, because first of all, in our predictions, we're almost always wrong.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're based on our biases.
They're based on our biases, right? History. So we are horrible prediction machines as humans, and and so we need to sort of get in this position where we sort of, instead of taking information that's given to us in order to confirm something that we already believe, is we need to be open to say, what's this information really mean? And does it challenge something, what I believe or what the customer believes? And what's the value of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So when we dig into your article, I mean, you talked about the confirmation bias, or we'll say biases in general, playing out over sort of 3 or 4 dimensions, I guess: buyer, seller, manager, some strategic considerations. Well, let's sort of jump into like the buyer's behavior, because this is really powerful. I mean, biases really come into play here. And you gave the example if the buyer already has developed a strong preference for a vendor before engaging with your sales team, then that's going to be hard to sway them, no matter what you tell them.
Yeah, true, and I think that's always the case with the incumbent, if especially if it's a something they built themselves, and they have something, right, and it's there, and it's changing it. Unless they have a very strong motivation, it's going to be painful. They're going to move away from the status quo. So yeah, I think a lot of times they're trying to find flaws in other solutions than the ones they prefer.
Or not even really give it the right consideration, right? I mean, I think that as I was reading that, it called to mind Daniel Kahneman's concept of cognitive ease. I don't know if you read his book Thinking Fast and Slow, but
absolutely.
But basically as humans, we're geared to want to take the path of least resistance in our thinking.
Yep. Saves energy for the brain.
It saves energy to the brain. If we had to give consideration to every single thought that passed through our mind during the day, I like to give the example, we'd be like dogs, right? We'd be sleeping 8 hours during the waking hours, and then we'd sleep all night because we'd just be exhausted. And that's sort of my theory about why dogs sleep all the time, is because when they're awake, they're paying such close attention to the humans, right? And it's like, it's just tiring. Just can't do it. So if we were like that, as you said, if we had to sort of shake out of the what he called System 1 thinking, cognitive ease, and really focus on everything that was going on, everything, we just couldn't do it. And so it's easier to go with the one right? In the case of you have an established vendor, it's just brain-wise, it's just easier.
Much easier.
And it sort of plays in this idea of also, I think, into this idea of perception. So I wrote about this in my last book and had done a bunch of research into it, the research that's been done about perceptions. And it aligns with what Kahneman said, is that, and he sort of acknowledges this in his book too, is that when we form perceptions of someone, they're really sticky because we don't want to spend the mental energy to change it, even when we're given evidence that contradicts our perception. Right? Yeah. So in the case of a preferred vendor, is you think about the buyer's mindset is, they're just not, it's going to be really difficult. That's really, really high bar to get them to look at anything different, because that's just the way the brain works. They formed perception and they're loath to change it.
Yeah, no, that's definitely completely true, I think. And the brain, like you mentioned, I think that this laziness is our survival mechanism, and that's what we need to break through as salespeople. How do we get the brain to sort of wake up and engage system 2, if that's what we should call it? And I think every time you hear something that's boring, you ignore it, right? And if it's dangerous, you run away, or you stay fight.
Right, fight or flight. Well, but I think that's really the key point, though, is as we look at this idea, okay, well, how do we overcome some of these fixed patterns of thought or biases, if you will? And that's exactly right. I think part of the reason that people operate in that framework of sort of cognitive ease is it's a way to mitigate the risk of any situation. And so, as you said, the danger is, if you create the perception of risk,
exactly,
then that disrupts that in a way that could be positive for you as a seller.
And when that becomes too complicated, that's when all these biases kick in, I think. When the messaging becomes complicated, you really the brain just really tries to simplify it as much as possible. And that's where you start throwing in things that are not facts, but biases and conclusions that are wrong and predictions that may be wrong. So I think that's why communication and marketing can be so powerful. If someone can phrase an offering or in a few really enticing words, that can be extremely effective to get through to someone. But like when you have technicians trying to write a marketing lingo, never works because they want to make sure you understand everything about it. So and that just makes everyone, this was, I don't understand anything of that. What did he say? It's like, no, let's go back to the other vendor.
Right. Well, I think there's been, certainly in the aftermath of the election here in the United States last year, is there was a lot written about, well, geez, if you looked at this whole thing logically, right, there's no way that, certain segments of the electorate should have voted for Trump because what he was saying is just sort of what his program is antithetical to their interests. But what they're saying is that trying to convince people logically is never the way to win them over to your side. Right, it wasn't about logic.
No, and I don't think we're very motivated by logic. We make decisions on our emotions connected to our values and beliefs, and then we justify them based on logic.
After the fact, exactly.
And you construct the logic to work for you.
Oh yeah, it's you, like I say, you rationalize it, right? You rationalize the decision based on the emotional decision you made. Yeah, which. Again, not that it may seem like we strayed from the topic of biases a little bit, but it's the biases that really are at play in the perceptions that are somewhat immune to logic.
Yes,
and that's where the emotion and creating. You talked about creating danger, creating risk. Some people flee from risk. People want to mitigate the risk that they have, but in other times, the risk also creates opportunities, because then in the case of like buyers, they may say, well, and you gave the example like using sort of the challenger methodology. I always like to say, you ask customers a question about something about their business they should know but don't. Another powerful motivation is that fear of missing something, right? The risk of missing out on something. It's not just the risk of change. That's countered by the risk of, oh shit, what are we going to miss by not listening to this person?
Yeah, it's a little bit like the movie Inception. You want to plant some seeds, some thoughts in their minds, and that cause them to think differently and challenge their own previous conclusions or predictions. So if you can do that well, it's super powerful. I think talking about Challenger, that was a big talk for a few years ago, and a lot of people misread or misunderstood or implemented it quite maybe incorrectly, and just started having arguments with clients and call that challenging, and that's probably not the way to do it. So, but yeah, no. I think if you hear that they are sort of stuck in their minds of what they have today, I think that's when okay, they're probably a bit biased here, and what can I do to sort of loosen them up a bit? And then I think that's when you need to start asking questions that empathizes with their current view, but also then challenges them or provides insights that makes them think, okay, maybe there's something better, or maybe I'm at risk by sticking with the status quo.
Right. No, I think it's more of the latter, right? I think that's because I was using Challenger long before Challenger was Challenger in selling large, complex stuff, and you're creating that perception of risk in the mind of the buyer that I'm going to miss something, right? That whether it's at a career level, because you always talk about this buyer has a career decision at stake or something like that. Well, hey, that's true in some cases, and the risk cuts both ways. It's the risk of doing something, but it's also equally balanced out by the risk of not doing anything, and you have to be able to play to that as well. So, from the seller standpoint, in your article, you talked about one problem with salespeople is one of their aspects of confirmation bias in their own mind is that, hey, if the first couple calls of a deal with a new prospect go well, they tend to weigh those opportunities more optimistically in terms of potential close. And let's talk about that a second, because I think that is true. That's more of this cognitive ease, right? I formed a perception of what these opportunities are, and facts to the contrary, these are still good, even if you get to a point where there are indications that they're not going to be a great prospect for you, or they're not going to close in the time frame or whatever.
Yeah, and I think there's another big risk there. If that's the interpretation of these initial meetings, there's also a tendency to start skipping important steps in the process because they think that it's a done deal. So they've had a great meeting with the CEO and the CFO, and they're all fired up about the financial benefits of investing in a particular solution, but there are 5 other stakeholders that they have not talked to.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't. But because the first meeting was great, and then we're at the C level, and everyone is fired up. I don't even have to talk to the other 5. I will just go right ahead and create the proposal, and I'm going to sign them tomorrow. So, and I think that's a big risk when you start having these ideas that you just confirm to yourself that everything is so good that you skip the discipline to do all the things you need to do in order to get the buyer to reach consensus.
Well, yeah, and I think another form of that we see frequently, this we'll call it the confirmation bias at work, is that sort of another spin on what you just talked about. Example, where you had good first meetings with CEO and so on, but oftentimes, and I think maybe more prevalent cases, you have good initial meetings with someone who isn't, they may be part of the decision-making team, but they're the person on that team, whether they're the stakeholder that's willing to talk to you, right? To spend time with you. And as a result, you tend to give more weight to the information that they give you, right? And you tend to rely on the information they get. That's your bias, right? And you tend to sort of shut out the information you're getting from the other sources. And I see that all the time with sales reps is, John, my guy John at the account, he's telling me we're in good shape, right? Every time I call John, he picks up the phone and answers. Yet the other 5 people are not quite as convinced as John, and John doesn't carry extra weight in order to have his opinion be worth more than the other. So you get led down the garden path by John, and you don't get the deal.
Yeah, classic. Absolutely.
That's I think a classic example of sort of confirmation bias.
Yeah, you just listen to what you want to hear. That you have those happy ears, which I think is most salespeople tend to have the happy ears. So that's a scary thing. That and as I'm a process freak, that's sort of how I think we can solve some of these issues. Because we need to be more disciplined and work in the throughout the process to make sure, have you done this? Have I done this? Have I forgotten something important? Because it's so easily done today that you're stressed, and John is a great guy, and I take that for face value, and then I just skip a number of things I should be doing. But if you have a very well-designed process, you'll keep yourself on track. So.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the articles, make sure you have well-defined, exit criteria for every stage that people have to meet, and part of that is not just the discipline for the salesperson, but discipline of the manager as well, because managers are as complicit in this as with the salespeople, oftentimes, because sometimes they're being judged on coverage in the pipeline and so on, and there's somewhat of an incentive on their part not to look too closely at everything that's in there.
Yeah. And even if they looked closely, depending on how they've set that up, it might be difficult for them to actually get that visibility to understand everything about every deal in the pipeline.
Well, it certainly takes an investment of time. That's for sure.
It does, yeah.
Well, that's sort of an interesting thing, because I look at myself and my experiences is when I do a pipeline review, I go over everything, right? I mean, that's just me. I mean, you're a process freak. Me, I want to understand that they understand the detail.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so for me, pipeline review is a pretty detailed, drawn out process, but you don't do it every day, obviously. But I want the salespeople to come away from that with an understanding is like, and not that I'm going to tell them directly, they're going to figure that out is like, oh yeah, he asked me questions about this, this, and this, and I didn't have answers for that. I need to go find it.
Yep. Exactly. And that's what I think, if you have a good process and a good methodology and you systemize that, then sort of you can automate some of that managerial work and make sure that everyone does ask those questions.
Right.
So yeah, but it's funny. And then when we're talking about confirmation bias and sales managers, you can get into the situation where you have a bias about different team members, right? So.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Lisa she's great. I don't have to do a pipeline review with her. She's always fantastic. Or Dave always sandbags. So you start having these biases that cause you to maybe take the wrong actions and not be the best manager.
Well, yeah. I mean, unfortunately, we see this all the time. Is look at the way accounts are allocated or leads are allocated.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, you'd like to think that they're all done. Everybody's got a system, round robin distribution or something, and leads are distributed equally. But you and I both know, and as well as most people listening know, that's not really what happens in practice. Is that a big opportunity comes in, and the manager says, "Well, I can't give this to John, even though this is John's territory. I'm going to go give it to Lisa because I think she's more dependable. My perception of her is, my bias is she's more dependable in getting this done, as opposed to saying, well, how do I coach John to become as good as Lisa?
And how do I motivate him to become better? It's not by giving deals to Lisa."
Yeah. So, I mean, the biases work. I see that constantly. I had an email from a listener not that long ago that had this situation occur to them. And they had worked for a company for a long time. They'd worked their way up to handling bigger accounts. They went out and brought in, proactively had developed a large opportunity and had closed it. And then a sister division of the opportunity, or the main office, I forget which one of the opportunity he had closed, said they were interested, but his managers wouldn't give it to him because they perceived him as being, and their bias was he was too junior. They gave it to someone else, even though he had developed that account. It's like,
ouch, that hurts.
Yeah, it's ouch, and it hurts, right? But that's the sales manager bias at work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so you sort of, as a manager, you have to question: is this? Am I being even-handed? Am I being biased, or am I operating purely out of what I think is self-interest, and the short-term self-interest, which is not necessarily the same as long-term self-interest?
True. And that's a different topic in itself. Long-term versus short-term. That can create a lot of trouble.
Yeah. All right. Well, George, unfortunately, we're out of time, but great conversation. Glad to have you back on the show again. We'll make sure we do it. Won't wait so long the next time. And
it's always fun to be here.
Yeah, so tell folks how they can learn more about Membrain and get in contact with you. Yeah,
just go to membrain.com. That's MEM and then brain, or find me on LinkedIn, where I share some of my thoughts on selling, and my blog, of course. I would be happy to have people subscribe to it and keep on track what I'm saying.
Yeah, George, I'll recommend George's blog. He thinks very deeply about sales. He's got some good contributors on there as well. And somebody, you have to ask me to contribute something, George. And
you should.
Yeah. But I do recommend people go read it. I do. So, all right, George, thanks again.
Andy.
Friends, thank you for spending this time with us today. Make sure you come back, join us again for next episode of Accelerate. Until then, if you get a chance, if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcast. So thanks again for joining me. Until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.